Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. Today, my guest is Frank Pagano. How are you today?
I'm good. How you doing, Clayton?
I'm wonderful. Nice to see
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
And I got to say that when we did our communication in order to make this thing happen, you suggested I watch a documentary because you wanted me to see this. I'm so glad I saw it. It's called Banded Together, The Boys from Glen Rock High School. And for those that are watching on YouTube, this is it. And I highly recommend you check it out. I love documentaries. And this was fantastic. First of all, I didn't realize how much talent came from this high school, but just how it was put together and how it viewed each individual near the end. And it went down. Oh my God, it was just really, really well put together. Thank you for sending this to me. But tell me, you're from Glen Rock, New Jersey, right?
Correct.
How often do you go back there? Or do you go
Um,
back there at all?
Once in a while. I'm really not that far. I'm in Tenafly, so I'm about half hour closer to town than closer to New York. So once in a great while, I'll go back for you know, reunions or whatever. It's not like I have to get on a plane, so I can go back and hang with some people occasionally.
So Glen Rock High School, did you start playing drums in high school or was it before high school?
Yeah, I started playing drums in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, elementary school. When we were kids, there was this place in town called the Mobile Music Man, which rented all the instruments for the orchestras and bands. Every year, they would come and they would give a little concert at all the elementary schools, and guys would play the different instruments. They would play together, and then they would play little solos, and then they would take questions. I just saw the drums and I fell in love with it. It was just like, oh boy, I want to do that. Because drums, aside from sonically, I mean, visually, it's interesting to watch someone playing the drums. I mean, when you're playing piano or playing guitar, I don't know what's going on there. I see fingers moving, but with the drums, it was very clear to me as a little kid, like, oh, this is really cool.
Was there any outside influence to make you gravitate towards the drums?
No, there was pretty much just me. In my family, were all artists. I was pretty good too. I was always an art major and a music major.
Man,
But I enjoyed the music because the camaraderie, I enjoyed being with people and playing with people, and, I think and the art thing was very, centered to one guy doing it, yeah, so no one in my family immediate family no, I'm sure you go back far enough, you're gonna find musicians in the DNA, but, n not in my immediate family. That was pretty much my thing.
were the Ravino brothers and Doug and Jeff and Joe and Uncle Floyd, were they in your elementary school too?
Yeah, actually, when we were in the 4th grade, which is when we all started this, the Vivinos came, they were living in Paterson, which is just a short hop away from Glen Rock, and so their family moved, and we met in the 4th grade, and we had our first band in the 4th grade, which was Jimmy is a guitar player now, obviously, but he was a trumpet player when we were kids, and his brother Jerry was a clarinet player, and Floyd was a little older than us. He was, like, a little too cool to hang with us when we were that small. So we played in our first band, I was playing drum, and Jimmy was playing trumpet and Jerry was playing the clarinet. We played little songs for assemblies or whatever.
Jerry still plays clarinet, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
clarinet and saxophone. His main axe is he's a tenor player, but
Mhm.
he plays alto and
In
bari.
that DVD, just showing him, playing clarinet and playing tenor. Of course, Jimmy and yourself. I mean, that the whole band was so great. You,
Oh,
again,
thank you.
you got to watch this. So, usually people that are older than me, I mean, sure, you're just maybe a little bit older than me.
How old are you?
I'm going to be 59 this year.
All right.
And, usually people have s- certain drummers that they have seen on TV or, music that an album that they listen to. They're like, oh my God, this is life changing. Was there anything that you saw, any band that you saw, or any album that came out that you're like, okay, this is what I need to do?
Yeah, I think it's the first album I ever bought, which was Axis Bold as Love, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and you know, I, I wasn't I was more about the music than just the drums, like, guys like Buddy, they scared me. I watched them, and it's like, "Oh my god," like, I can never do that. The Real Chops guys, that was, like, beyond that was so far over my head, but with the rock guys, I immediately kind of gravitated to, and it's weird. I kind of found all other kinds of music through it. But when I bought Axis Bold as Love, Mitch Mitchell's playing, and then Mitch Mitchell's playing turned me on to Elvin because Mitch wanted to be Elvin. And I could hear, once someone would say to me, like, oh, you like dig this, and so oh shit, yeah, that's awesome, man. Nobody swings like that. That's a whole nother thing. So it's really weird how like that kind of music got me from, I was very into Frank Zappa and the Mothers when I was younger, and a guy would say to me, "Oh," he goes, "You like that?" He stole that right from the Planets. That's, and I was like, and then I put it on and listen. That's like verbatim
Who's the planets?
from Mahler.
Oh,
Planets, yeah, and
okay, okay.
he would steal, he would steal parts of sections of, and who else was it? It's like, I was into Jethro Tull, right? So Ian
Mm.
Anderson humming through the flute, and then someone would say, "Well, you gotta be dig Rasan," and so I go and I watch Rasan Roland Kirk, and it's like, "Oh my,
Oh,
that's from," So it's interesting. I came through the back door of rock and pop music and R&B. That's how I came to, so I was never really, I mean, later I came, when you had to zero in on how the instruments actually played. That's when I started getting more into the drums for the sake of the drums.
so there are a lot of people that I see that want to play on Broadway, and they tend to like play along to Hamilton or The Lion King or Chicago or NJ or whatever's out right now.
Yeah.
And I have talked to a lot of our colleagues and people like, you're playing the representative of the actual music. Now, what you just said, not that Jimi Hendrix and Mitch Mitchell weren't authentic in what they were doing, but they had influences that were based on other things. Of course, then you go to Elvin, you had to go back to find out what he was listening to. Damian Bassman said, you go back to the source. Instead of learning what I did on something, go back and then study the originals.
90% of the Broadway stuff is derivative.
Mm.
90% of it. And so source material is where you want to, as best you can, that's where you want to start. That's why I always used to tell students, do as many gigs as you can with as many different players you can in as many different bags as you can, because that's how you'll have an idea of like when you get called for a show, it's all coming from someplace. It's all derivative. And so if you know what the source material is, you got a shot of making it at least work in the way that it was originally conceived, because like you said, I certainly, when I was a kid, I wasn't listening to cast albums. Uh, That's
So you didn't go to the record store and pick up, Are You Experienced and Andy Get Your Gun at the
no,
same
not
time?
usually. No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen.
I didn't really know about Broadway until like the year 2000 when I got into it. I'm like, oh man, it's this whole other world out here. But it seems like today there's so many people that want to do it. Now, you got into Broadway way before I did. What was the first connection to the whole Broadway scene?
Again, I didn't come up the normal way. I had a Broadway show before I subbed the Broadway show. The first show I ever did was called Leader of the Pack. It was in the mid '80s. And it was a show that was conceived down at the bottom line when that existed. Ellie Greenwich and Jeff Barry, who was a songwriting team who wrote many of the Phil Spector hits, Be My Baby and He's a Rebel and all that stuff. They wrote River Deep and they wrote this stuff. Ellie was put with Alan Pepper, who was the owner of the bottom line, we're putting this show together. And so they hired a bunch of people to do all these tunes and have like a story. But the story was kind of, I wrote this and then I heard that and then I wrote that. And so there wasn't a great story to take you through, but the tunes were great and they were a lot of fun to play. So we did that back down at the bottom line for a while. I forget what the schedule was like. It was kind of weird. It was like maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday for 2 weeks in a row. And it started gaining like, I mean, people were coming like crazy. Like, you look out in the audience and there's Luther Vandross in the audience, and because he was good friends with Darlene Love, who was in it, and one of his background singers at one point. And who else? David Bowie's in the audience, and Joan Jett's in the audience, and Letterman comes down, because Paul Schaefer had something to do with it at that point.
Mm.
That's how I met all those guys. I met Will Lee and Paul and all those guys through, Leader of the Pack at the Bottom Line. And so it did so well. And then there was an article in the Times, and it just took off. It was like you couldn't get a ticket, and the lines were around the block. So then someone had the bright idea of bring it to Broadway.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of problems with the Broadway run.
Uh,
That's how I got there. That was the first show I had, and I started calling people to sub for me, and a lot of those people end up being some of my best friends and ones that we've thrown work back and forth all these years.
how did you find people to sub for you at that time? Did they have to have Broadway experience, or were just people that you knew?
The ones that had Broadway experience were the ones that worked. They continued to get the gig. I got the thumbs up because those guys already knew the deal. And as far as subbing on Broadway, you know the deal as well as anybody. You can't play your show, you play his show. Everyone's used to his show, and everyone loves his show. So play his show. And a lot of the guys that have never done it before, I'm going to show what I can do. Or no, I would play here. And no, no,
Okay.
that I can tell you one thing, that will not work. The old joke is don't wake anybody up. People that have been sitting there doing that show for a long time, and they're used to hearing what they hear, and that's what they want to hear. It ends up being right. Like what the guy is playing, whether it's musically right or wrong, has nothing to do with it. That is now right, and the sooner you can understand that and embrace that, and just try to get as close as you can to the guy who's playing the book. And which brings us to another thing. There's some books that, I watched and I said, this is so far from who I am that, like, I'm not going to spend all the time on it because everybody that subs the show, the drummer who's sitting there makes every choice. He chooses the cymbals, he chooses the cymbal heights, he chooses everything. And you can't go in there like the bull in the china shop and start rearranging things. So for whatever reason, there have been shows that I've watched. It's a little too far away from who I am. And, that seemed to work for me. I've always kind of been the guy, I go with the green lights. And if I see a yellow light or a red light, a yellow light makes me think, because sometimes it's just fear. The yellow light could just be fear. It could be like, oh, geez, but you could burn through that one and be really happy with yourself. But the red light,
Mm.
I don't usually go through the red light.
Words of wisdom here. I like that. Red light,
Well,
green light.
like you said, I'm not new. Could be a lot of things, but new ain't one of them.
Well, let's go back and talk about, Glen Rock High School
Mhm.
with Jimmy Vivino, Don Feeney, Jerry
Yep.
Vivino, Uncle Floyd Vivino, who was hilarious, Doug
Right.
Romoff,
Yep.
all these people that you worked with. You graduate high school, you went to Manhattan School of Music?
I did.
Okay. Then, you're in the New York, New Jersey area in the late 70s, early 80s.
Correct.
Now, I know people talk about the subway in New York City. I've been here almost 32 years.
Mhm.
Now, I remember when 1993, when everything was changing and it turned into a nice place to live in the late 90s,
Mhm.
all the way to the 2000s. But around 2015, 2013, things started to go downhill. Now it's, getting on the subway, it's not very fun. But from what I hear in the 70s, because I grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, one of my favorite movies of all time, and I may force my kids and my girlfriend to watch it like 17 times, is The Warriors. It's not a very good movie, but it depicted New York in 1979 with the gangs. And I'm like, oh my God, New York is so dangerous, and Escape from New York and all this stuff. Now, in 1970s New York, it was pretty dangerous.
It was dangerous, especially where Manhattan was. Manhattan's in Harlem. It's 122nd and Riverside there. I mean, it was not people were getting like I lived mostly on the Upper West Side in the 80s and the 90s. But people that live really close, like 122nd Street, 125th Street, th- people were mugged every 5 minutes. I'd come into school and what's her name? Oh, she's not here. She got mugged in her building last night. It was rough, man. It was rough.
Thank God. And now Manhattan School of Music is like, you can't get an apartment for under $10,000 a month.
Crazy, man. Yeah.
So being in the city at that time, the flip side to it is that you could live here as a musician and it wasn't as expensive.
Right.
And you could create with your friends. Now, would you I ask people this all the time, would you want to go back to that era or would you want to live in this era where it's well, yeah, an era 10 years ago where it's nicer, it's more expensive, but it's safer.
Yeah, I would go with safer, you know?
Okay.
It was dangerous, and when I think about I can't imagine, like, cause all the clubs are all downtown, and even though I'm living on the Upper West Side, but there's somebody at the Lone Star that I wanna see. So,
Mm,
I'm on the train, and when I think about being on the train at, like, 3 o'clock in the morning,
mm.
back then, you're taking your life in your hands, but I was a kid, I just didn't I wanted to hear that music, and so I would go, you know? When I think about it now, it's like, "Oh, go kinda nuts that I was doing that at that age, at that time of night," you know?
Yeah, you're kind of fearless at that point. You don't know any
Kind of
better.
fearless. Exactly.
Whereas Max's Kansas City, there were CBGBs, there was the Village Gate, there was Sweet Basil, Mikkel's, and all these
CBGB's.
places.
There's all
Yeah.
sorts of places, man.
But now there are a lot of places are in Brooklyn. And there were, I'm getting to the whole Broadway thing here. Is there was a lot of recording sessions. You had to record demos for people. You had to record jingles
Yeah,
that required musicians and
right.
TV shows and everything required musicians. There was a lot more opportunity. What made you, I mean, obviously you did that whole leader of the pack thing and kind of got into the whole Broadway through the back end. Were you thinking at all about Broadway or was Manhattan School of Music even, talking to people about those opportunities?
No,
Yeah.
no. We were all, we were shooting for the stars, man. Broadway was not a thing that we thought about. The reason I started playing more Broadway shows, well, 2 reasons. One is I understood what it was because of my first brush with it. My career has always been kind of wacky. I always kept one foot in the theater thing and one foot in the music touring and music business kind of thing. And it's worked really good for me. I mean, yeah, there's been tours that I had to turn down because I was locked in. And there's been shows that I had to turn down because I couldn't get out of a tour. But in general, I managed to, because when a show closes, like if you don't get another show, like if show closes in the fall and you don't get a show in the spring, and no one's thinking about you in the spring because in the fall you had a gig, right? So now you're a year or something before hopefully you get another one. So it's always managed to kind of do both. But the way I started taking Broadway seriously was I married a flight attendant and we had our son. And so he was born in 1990. And I started thinking like, oh, well, her gig, and it was great. I mean, before not that my son was a joy killer, he wasn't, I love him. But before that, if I'm on the road, she's meeting me on the road, we're in the islands, we're in San Francisco, we're wherever we are. It was great. So, but then what happened was now somebody's gotta stay home, and, her gig had the health insurance. So,
Ah,
I had to stay home. That's when I started looking more and calling more of my buds that were doing more Broadway. And, that's and I've had a real kind of a relationship with John Miller, who was one of the big contractors, because he had called me for things that I wasn't able to do. Like a few times he had called me for some stuff. And at this point, I was playing mostly percussion as far as on Broadway. As far as New York was concerned, I was a percussion player,
yeah.
which was fine. As you know, there's percussion players get more doubles and okay. And in some ways, a little less pressure, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
So I was playing a lot of percussion, and so John had called me a few times for some gigs I couldn't do. I was working already. But then, I think when Smokey Joe's happened, I was available. Although there wasn't and I wasn't available for the audition. I was actually out of town for the auditions. And I said, John, what can I do? And he goes, listen, he goes, I'll talk to the conductor and I'll hold off. I'll get until we get, and so I came back, um, and he had to set up this audition with the conductor, right? And they were already in rehearsal with the cast, you know. So I go in and I get to the audition and I realize like there's no accent. There's no instruments here. How am I going to audition? So I went and I introduced myself to the conductor, and he was his name was Louis St. Louis, and he's a big, very gregarious kind of guy, you know, someone to be reckoned with, you know, nothing mousy, but you know, just big, like you know, and he started talking, you know, we started talking, and I said, well, Louis, I'd love to play for you. He goes, no, no, no. He goes, "No, you don't have to play. If John Miller says you can play, I'm sure you can play." He goes, I just wanted to make sure you weren't an asshole.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
And a lot of times that matters. You know, it's the personalities.
In a Broadway pit, if you
Yeah.
got a low run, whoo, it can be rough, as you know.
So Smokey Joe's was your second show on Broadway?
Yeah, but I think I had probably subbed a couple before that. I'm pretty sure I had subbed a few before that. You know?
Okay, now going back to it was the early 80s when you started subbing. You had to get on the subway and go to Times Square. What I hear,
Yeah.
tourists used to go from the hotel and run to the theater and then run back. Some guy with a machete might be running down the street. Now you had to do
Yeah.
you had to do something similar, but
Yeah.
you know, back then there were no avions, and everybody was.
Yeah. And
How did?
90% of the time, no click.
Oh,
So,
that's true.
yeah,
That's
that
true.
Clayton, the click is our friend. 'Cause
Oh,
especially as a sub drummer, man.
yes.
Subbing a show with no click is the most difficult thing in the world because the only guy who really knows where the tempos are, he's not there.
And then to find out if the downbeat is here
Or the
or
upbeat.
here. The downbeat is.
Or if the downbeat is the upbeat. You know, now it's not even, we probably shouldn't get it. And now it's not even like we used to have, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you know,
Right.
we if I look up, I know, oh, that's 2. All right, that's 2.
Yes.
All right, here, and that's 1. But now it's all like, I don't know what it is half the time. It's like, you know, you got to know that music. Well, it doesn't matter. You have to know that music like you could play it in your sleep if you're going to sub a drum book in New York.
So back then, you had to go in with your. Did you have like a recorder, like those big recorders that you press and put
Yeah,
the tape in?
we had Walkmen. We had
Mm.
they were big, stupid things. You could barely hear it. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Mm.
But
You had to record it. Did you get a copy of the book like we do now? Like,
you get a copy of the book. You get a copy of the book. That part hasn't changed. It's just you forget about the conductor video. That didn't exist.
yeah.
That didn't exist. And you know how helpful that is. That's extremely helpful.
And you just had to, you know, everybody was in the pit. Was there baffling back then? Remember?
Not really. No.
So you couldn't play too loud.
No. I mean, it got loud because like a lot of the shows that I did were like pop shows. So yeah,
Yeah.
it could get loud. It could get loud.
Was Smokey Joe's your drum book? That was your gig?
That was my percussion book.
Who was on drums?
Ryan Brake, the great Ryan
Oh,
Brake.
man, I've been trying to get him on this podcast from the very beginning. I talked to him for hours, but he's just so elusive. He doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, he's done so much, dude. Why he doesn't want to? I
He
don't
is
know.
very elusive, man. It's hard for me to get him on the phone. And you know, I spent 5 years with him and we hung like so tight for so long.
Really?
I consider him one of my best friends, and it's very hard to get him on the phone. And boy, I mean, that was one great thing about playing percussion. I learned so much from some of the great drummers in New York just because I'm next to him. I'm standing right next to him. I get to feel every note. I get to see how they're, you know, if they're hitting the hi-hat with the shoulder of the stick or with the beat. You know what I mean? I get to see if the leg's up when they're playing the bit. You know, all those little things. I learned so much. It was that was the best for me That was the most fun about playing percussion, playing with great drummers and being able to watch what they're doing. And, it's free lessons. You get free.
As I went to go see Rodney Howard play Back
Uh-huh.
to the Future. I was just watching him like, oh my God, I didn't realize just watching him play, it was getting a free lesson because he's such a great drummer. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, maybe I can do that. No, I can't do that. Well, just incorporate this next time. One good thing about going to watch other people play,
Yeah.
you learn something from them, or you can take things away or throw
Correct.
things out.
No, sure. Absolutely. You can learn what not to do too.
Yes.
But most of that was more of the personal end of like, some guys could play so great and you wonder, well, how come they don't get hired? Well, because they could really be a pain in the ass sometimes. When
Mhm.
yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. And especially here in New York, so many great players, man. If
Mhm.
you're bringing baggage, it's not good. Not good. It's got to, be respectful, show up on time,
Mhm.
do your homework.
I didn't know very much about Lieber and Stoller, and I don't know why I did a deep dive into them. And I went and saw this interview that they did with David Letterman back in the 80s, and they played all their hits.
Yeah.
And then I did one of the things that they showed, they're like, well, this is, something that else that we did. And they showed clip a Broadway Smokey Joe's Cafe. I'm like, God damn, who's in that fucking band? That band is killing. Okay, I
That was a great
realized Rake,
yeah.
Dave Keys,
Yeah.
right? Dave Keys in the
Yeah.
band too. I can't remember
Absolutely.
who else was playing bass in the band.
Frank
Right.
Canane Frank
Frank
Canano
Canino?
played
I mean,
guitar.
come on.
Yeah, Drew Zing was playing guitar. Drew was a monster. And Chris Emenizer, tennis player, spectacular player. That was a great band. We had a lot of fun. We had fun from the second we hit that stage, because we weren't in a pit. We were on a wagon behind a scrim. And the beginning of the second act, we would come out, they would pull us out, and we would start the second act, and then we would go back in, the scrim would come down, and the actors would be in front.
Wow.
So we got to know it was really like a family because, I've done shows and I don't even know who's up there. You know what I mean? Like the cast, you see them in the hall or something, but you don't really know them. Smokies, we were all good friends because like we saw each other every day and talked and hung. But Brian, man, he had a backbeat like nobody's business, man. It was
Mm.
beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I gotta try to get him on again just to have his story out there. People just don't know how great he was. Yes.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I think he's still doing these gigs with Hugh Jackman, I think. That's what last
Yeah,
time I
no, that one,
talked to him.
that's his boy.
Yeah. And you wanna know a
Mm.
funny story about his boy? Let me tell you a funny story. The reason they know each other is because of the boy from Oz, right? Okay, that was the first show that they did together, and the reason they did it was because Louis St. Louis, it was initially his show, right? So he hired a band, and Brian was part of the rhythm section. Then Louis lost the gig for whatever reasons, and the new MD didn't want any of the guys. They wanted to bring their own. And there was at that point, Local 802 had a little bit of pull and they could actually say, no, these guys have right of first refusal.
Mm.
And so they stayed on. Carrie Potts was the bass player who we
Mm.
miss and love.
Oh.
But Brian was the drummer and they didn't want Brian. And no, 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 we don't. And then they got Brian. And guess what? They never used anyone other than Brian ever since, you know? The way it goes, man. I wouldn't turn down Brian Brake if I were you, but do what you want. Do what you want.
It's like a threat.
Yeah.
So I see on your site,
Mhm.
there's a bunch of different shows like Tommy and the Burnt, Art Boys, Fat Camp, the
Yeah.
Really Rosie, Around
Yeah.
the Sun, Bossy. And did you sub on these, or these were your shows like Pirate
Some of
Queen, the City?
some of them were mine and some I subbed on. Tommy, I subbed for my good friend Charlie Descarfino. He was a percussion player.
Yes.
Yeah, I subbed on that. I think that was primarily a timpani book, if I can remember correctly. Burnt Part Boys was mine, and that was a pretty cool show we did. That was an off-Broadway show, and that was a drum set book. Some percussion, but mostly drums. Um, what would you mention? Pirate Queen.
Mhm.
That was I was playing drums on that. That was my gig. Uh,
Crybaby.
Crybaby was my gig, playing drums. Yep. I mean, it's like, it's funny these shows too, because you bring them up and I start thinking, and I was like, Crybaby was a big deal. I thought, oh, this is gonna be a big run because Hairspray was huge. and this is his other movie,
Mm.
and so I thought, "Oh, man, this could be a good thing." Nope. Nope.
Yeah, before we got on this podcast,
Mhm.
we were just both talking about how shows don't run very long anymore, and how there are times where you think that you have a hit show. Like I thought I had a hit show with Ain't Too Proud, and stuff happens where it just never comes back or doesn't run. How do you deal with the inconsistency of shows and just being a musician in general and not being able to have steady income? So as you know, you're a father, you have responsibilities.
Exactly, yeah.
How did you deal with the uncertainty of this lifestyle?
Well, it wasn't easy. It's like everybody else, it's like I always felt like I don't know if you might be too young, but the Popeye cartoons, it was the baby Sweepy, and he would get on the girder, and he would go out to the ends of the girder, and then the next girder would come in, and then he would get on that girder. It was always this thing. I mean, you think he's gonna fall, and and then he gets on the next. That's kind of how my career went. And it's like right before anything got crazy, something else good happened. And like I said, I think having one foot outside of theater, as far as music gigs are concerned, is a good idea. Unfortunately, there's just not as much as there used to be. And you used to have, there used to be jingles. There used to be because I was just a little too young to hit the record date thing where
Okay.
guys, you know what I mean? But I was cutting my teeth on jingles the way you do, and then it started getting crazy. The money started getting insane, and they're going to call the same three guys or wait for them.
Mm.
But I always kind of kept one foot in and one foot out, and then of course I was also doing some private teaching at my house, and that was another way to just keep being able to buy lunch, like the lunch money thing. Uh, but yeah, it's not easy, and it's not getting easier because there's not enough of the other work. Like, when I was coming up, we were doing club dates. I guess in LA they call them casuals, but you go, you play somebody's wedding, you play somebody's bar mitzvah, you play. And we used to just show up and it was not unusual to show up on a gig and not know anyone. Playing with four other guys, you don't know who they are. But everybody knows a ton of standards and everybody knows a couple of rock tunes, R&B tunes, and then the disco thing, so you have to know some disco. So, I did a lot of that, and the money, I mean, was it fun work? No, it wasn't fun work. It was a grind, but the money was good, and you did it, and, that was another way. And also, I think, like you said, like, now guys are coming right out of college into showbiz, into doing playing shows and wanting to play shows, and, um, that didn't exist when I was a kid. Nobody came out of conservatory wanting to play Broadway shows. I mean, it just didn't happen. There was not that there was anything wrong with it. We just didn't know about it. It wasn't radar, like at all. So we're playing floodlight, anything to make a living, anything to piece together some kind of living that we could live like people and not be afraid to sign the mortgage.
Mm.
Mm.
Were you a part of the whole radio registry thing back in the day?
Yes, but at the very end of that, if the guys are those guys are like 3 to 5 years older than me,
Okay.
that were really hammering it. I mean, some guys my age, I'm sure were. I wasn't. When we came into New York from Jersey, it didn't have there was no street cred involved there at that point. We were like, like they say, "Oh, outer boroughs, the outer boroughs guys."
Mm.
So Jersey and Long Island was kind of the same thing. You had kind of a, they that nobody wanted to really open the door for us.
Wow.
But, you keep knocking on the door. You keep knocking on the door, and you keep taking gigs that other people aren't gonna take, and you keep doing your best, and you get through, and eventually you get through. But, yeah, there was always a stigma about guys from Jersey or guys from the island or outer boroughs, like, the guys that were in town and doing all the really good work, they wanted to continue doing the really good work.
Speaking of that, it's the late 70s, early, especially the early 80s. I remember speaking to a colleague of mine on this podcast. He was saying, Damon Duwhite, he said, when I got out of Berkeley, the drum machine got on the 7 o'clock bus to Manhattan, and I got on the 8 o'clock bus.
Yeah,
So how did you? What did you see? Like, did you hear music? Like, what the hell? What's that? Why are there no drums? Like, how did you react to that? And how did you
well,
get around it?
well, you know, it was just another obstacle now. It was bad enough. I got enough obstacles. We got a million guys in New York that can play their ass off. I mean, it's an obstacle. And boy, you got a machine that they don't have to pay. It's like, gosh. So it was just another obstacle. Thankfully, that whole thing sort of ran its course quicker than I expected. And people just got tired of it. It's like, yeah, it's not that much fun. There's no fun factor there. It's not, there's no Vinnie Colaiuta playing some wacky thing that like you go, oh my God, what was that? It's just, so it kind of ran its course. But the interesting thing was like when I when I was teaching and out of college, I used to tell people and playing show, starting to play shows and stuff. I would tell my students, don't go start playing shows until you're in your 30s. Do not play shows in your 20s. And they're like, well, because in order for you to be a good drummer, you got to have some kind of internal clock. You have to have you have to be able to play time in your own way and by a method of your own. It you know, these instruments don't play themselves. We learn to play the instrument. We make choices along the way all the time. You play your time. And that's another thing. When I would watch people play shows, if I feel the time in a similar way, I'm going to say, yeah, fine, I'm going to play it. But if I don't feel the time in a similar way, I'll probably bail. I say, because that doesn't feel right to me. Not that it's wrong. It's just not to me. It's not right. And until you have your own, some kind of internal clock, some kind of way to so when you get on a bandstand with guys that are good players and stuff, you're not going to end up in some other place. Like at the end of the tune, it's like, what happened? How did we get here? Or come out of a fill too short, or you're going to have some kind of and on Broadway, you, you're playing the conductor's time. Now, some conductors are great and understand that if it's a show with a rhythm section, it's different than like a through composed orchestral piece. There's two different animals and they work completely different. And so, I used to tell my students, you have to have your own way of keeping time first before you give it up. Because if you give it up too soon to someone else, you won't have that. I mean, you won't be able to have that feeling of confidence that, yeah, this is the tempo, and you got to be, sometimes you got to be the cop. Somebody's going into business for themselves. They're starting to rush. You can, ease them back into the lane, and constantly adjusting and trying to keep everyone honest. And because that's the way you're going to get it to feel the best. I mean, people think that time is about the metronome. It's only a small amount about the metronome. It's about how you get the metronome to feel. How does that feel? Does that make grandpa want to dance? Does that, or are people going to just keep clicking their glasses and drinking and go talk at the bar? That's why I loved it when we started using clicks, because now it's not going to be a problem with you. You, you already have you already have like a good, what's the word I'm looking for? Relationship. You already have a good relationship with the click. You've been practicing with the clicks your whole life. So it's like, oh, that's like, might as well be my friend playing the cowbell. I know how to deal with this. But so many times on Broadway, the conductor's trying to catch the singer upstairs who's God knows what's going on up there. And then so now you're trying to make sense of it. A lot of instruments, hey, you can just stop. A guitar player, if he really wants to, he can just stop and wait and come back. We don't have that option, right? I mean, we have the responsible instruments, bass and drums. Like James Brown used to say, we have to be on the one. We can't guess. We can't wait and listen and then come in.
It's very great advice to wait till you're in your 30s because you're just not really ready yet. And I listened to back to what the way I used to play in
Mhm.
my 20s. All we all do. They playing really bombastic,
A
and
lot. Yeah.
sometimes you rush and you're excited.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now, I play in club date bands and playing to a steady rhythm, and then I had to hit the pad
Hmm.
and then start it. And it's right there because I've played these songs for so long, and I know, like,
It's in your body.
somebody
Yeah,
says, "Give me 120 beats per minute." I know exactly what that feels like within like two
of course.
beats per
Yeah,
minute. Because
yeah.
and even 96, I refer to certain things like 96 beats per minute. I know what song is at 96 beats per minute, and I can play that. It's hard to describe, I guess, but what you're saying, it makes sense, and maybe I need to find a way to relate that to people. But I think what you said is you just have to have that experience playing as a musician for several years in several different settings
Yeah. And
in
yeah,
order
and
to make.
this comes back to the other question about what's source material, you know?
Mm,
I mean, when we were on club dates, we used to play everything. We're playing swing tunes, you name it. We're playing different bags all the time. So that on Broadway, you can feel comfortable playing a swing show, or you can feel comfortable playing an R&B show, or you can feel comfortable, like whatever it is, because you've had experience playing all these other kinds of music with people. And let me tell you, when we used to play, when I was a kid, guys had no problem telling you you were rushing or
mm.
"What do you're playing too loud," or, or I remember I was at a club once, and Bernard Purdy, who's my friend and one of my many mentors, I remember him saying to somebody on the stage, "If you can't hear my hi-hat, you're playing too loud." And it's like, "Yeah, well, yeah, that's
Mm.
absolutely right," you know? So so having all these other experiences in different that's why I say play as much music as you can with as many different musicians as you can, because that's the source material that you're going to need when you have to sit in a Broadway pit and play a certain music with, efficiency and, make it sound right, make it feel right, you know?
It sound authentic.
Exactly.
You work with so many legendary artists. What is one or two that really stand out to you?
The first one I knew was that I worked with tons of different songwriting teams and songwriters and stuff. The ones that a real artist that knew who they were, what they wanted to say, and had a way. The first one you probably won't recognize, but you know her tunes. Laura Nyro was an incredible singer-songwriter. She was a true artist in the true sense of the word. She knew what was right for her. She knew writing when she would write songs, it was from a specific place, and, you know, she knew if a song was right for her, she knew if it wasn't right for her. She had an idea of how she wanted it to sound, and the weird thing about Laura was at first, she didn't talk like a musician. She's not gonna say, I'm hearing like eighth notes on the high eighth. No, she didn't talk like that at all. It was all about like visual thing, like, "Oh, I hear wood. I hear," like show you a picture of something. It's gotta kind of feel like it. And at first it totally threw me for a total loop. I didn't know which way was up. But the longer I hung with her and the more I played with her, the more you get to understand what she's talking about. And, it was funny because Jimmy Vivino and I were on the gig together with her. We were at a rehearsal and there was a tune that we were playing and we were saying, "Oh, this harmony, somebody's got to be on this harmony. It's the way, it just would sound so beautiful." And Laura would say, "I can't, and I just, that's not going to work." And then eventually we'd press her on it. And she said at one point, "I can't have a man singing that note in this tune."
Yeah.
And either me, Jimmy, or I said, "But the music is kind of calling for it." And she said, "You think the only thing we're doing here is playing music?" She's like, "We're communicating feelings to these people." And I can't and so she's on like this other level, you know, but sure worked for her. It sure worked for her. And all those tunes that you hear on like on the Fifth Dimension records, Stone Soul Picnic and Wedding Bell Blues, most of the harmony parts come from from Laura's records. They
Oh,
came
wow.
Yeah. So, like she never had the hit with them, but a lot of that stuff came from her. So she was a real artist. And the other one is, I have to say, and I was never a huge fan, to be perfectly honest, as a kid. Bruce Springsteen knows what he's doing.
Mm.
He knows what he's doing. I did a bunch of sessions playing percussion around the time of his greatest hits record. And some of them were with the E Street Band, everyone was there, but some of them were just me and him the engineer and the producer. And he, I'd be out there like maybe playing congas or something and, auditioning parts for different sections as you do, and it's weird. Anytime he would ask me for something and I would give it to him the best that I could. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, this is it. It doesn't feel. And as soon as I'm thinking, this doesn't feel right, he said, no, 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 all right, that's not working. That's not working. Let's try it. He knows, he's a great producer himself of the music. And the other thing that's totally struck me about him was like, he's a relentless workaholic. We're in the, when the people are in the studio, like, talking about stuff and the engineers getting stuff ready and whatever, and everyone's, he's in the big room, cross-legged on the floor with a pad. He's constantly writing. He's constantly, he's like, his ethic was insane. Well, I mean, and I don't want to say not my best friend. I can't call him on the phone, but the amount of time that I spent with him, it just amazed me. Two things that amazed me is like what a clear vision he has for the way his songs are supposed to sound, and how hard he works, and how hard he's constantly writing. He's constantly writing. He's constantly writing. I forget someone in the band. I don't remember if it was Van Zandt or maybe Gary Talent. Someone was saying when I said like he's writing out there, and someone says, "Oh no." He goes, we'll finish this record. Before we finish this record, he'll have two more records worth of tunes that are great for the next. It's like, wow, okay, that's kind of great. And like I said, I work with a million great singers and songwriters and songwriting teams, but those are the two that came to mind first. That was obvious to me.
Now you said you have one foot in the pit and one foot on the road.
Yeah.
You've toured with so many different artists. How did you adapt to life on the road as opposed to in the pit? Did you like being on the road more, or I know it's
Um,
totally different, but
I like being on the road more only because things are different every day.
Mhm.
Things change. It's not so much of the same. The pit can be great when the hang is great. When the hang is great and you go in, they're paying you to go in and play great music with your friends. I mean, come on, man. Who gets that?
Right.
So that's great. The road can be rough on your body. Especially the older you get, it's like, oh, spend 4 or 5 hours in a Sprinter van or something. You get out, my knees are cracking.
Then the beds, you gotta sleep on a certain bed. You're like, oh man.
Oh, yeah.
Wake up.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. True
You
that.
studied with Joe Morello. How did those lessons impact your playing?
Joe, I have to be honest with you. I wasn't ready for Joe when I studied with him. I wish I had studied with Joe about 5 years later or about
Mm,
5 years earlier. Joe's thing was very much about the physical aspect of playing the drums. He was, he had this ergonomic approach. Like you sit normally, you let your hands lay at your side, you lift them like that. That's how you play. And he had this whole thing of full strokes and half strokes and rebound and understanding how to make the sticks work for you instead of having to work too hard for the sticks. And this was all like tremendous stuff. Unfortunately, at the time I was studying with Joe, I was just out of college. I had played so much percussion that I wanted to open up my head more to the music. Like what I was really getting into jazz a lot, and because before that, like I told you, I was more of a pop guy. I kind of wanted someone who could guide me as far as, it's like when I walk in to a store and I want to buy classical music. It's mind-boggling. There's so much classical music. Like, what's good? I mean, what's great? What will I like? It's hard to know that unless you have someone who could say, "You'd really dig this. Oh, you'd really dig this." So I needed a teacher at that time who I could say, "Give me 20 albums to buy." And, and they would. I found a amazingly great teacher called Justin DeChocho, which I'll tell you about. But Joe was tremendous. I mean, he opened my head up to how to play the drums, how to, aside from like, I'd studied with a guy that was Alan Silverman, great player. He went to Manhattan. He kind of steered me into Manhattan. He was playing with the American Symphony at the time, but this is all classical. This is all legit percussion playing. So when I studied with Joe and I was learning all this great stuff, but I still was kind of clueless as to the music, how to apply, where to apply this, how to apply this. So after a while, I maybe did like 10 lessons with Joe. So I wasn't one of his guys that really studied and really got into it. If I was a little older, if I could do it now, it would be
Mm.
tremendous. I'm ready, you know. But at that point, I kind of wasn't. But I found this teacher, Justin DiCiocio, who's one of those Rochester guys, like Gad and all those other. They had a thing in Rochester, man, for drummers. And so Justin was in there. He was teaching at Music and Art High School. He was also teaching at Manhattan after I split. Great teacher, like the amazing teacher. He's the kind of guy that like he'll call you in the middle of the week and say, "How's it going?" And you'll say, "Well, I'm having a trouble." Yeah, I figured that. Listen, this is what you have to do.
Mm.
Crazy, crazy good teacher. And so I told him, I said, what record? Gave me a list. These are the records. These are records you want to listen. Listen to this. Listen to this. And then as he was teaching me his concepts, which were mind opening, um, he would, and he was such a great teacher. He said, "Listen, I'm not telling you this is the only way to play. I'm just telling you, this is the way I like to hear people play. And, depending on your taste, you may or may not. But, all the guys that he turned me on to are like my favorite, like Philly Joe Jones. He played this stuff for me. This is magic. Listen to these guys play is just like magical. And I could see how his concepts applied to the music that I was hearing. I could,
Mm.
oh, I see how this works. Like with Buddy, when I first started watching, that stuff was so over my head. It's like, I don't know what's going on. All I know is I can't do that. That whatever that is, I can't do. But this other stuff, playing good time, making it feel good, I want to do that. I mean, I feel like if I can do anything, it might be that. So Joe was spectacular and an amazing player and an amazing teacher. It's just I wasn't ready for him at the time. I needed something else at that moment.
So speaking of records to listen to, what records would you say are representative of your playing on a cast recording and in the real world?
Uh, well, that's interesting. Let me think about that. Well, the much maligned Margaritaville, I think I played really well on that. I think it's a good cast recording. I mean, I love, I'm an old man. I love those tunes. And we had a lot of fun making it. Everything felt really good. Band was great. That was the first one I can think of. Crybaby was great. We did that record much later for
Mm.
some reason. I don't remember what the reason was. Smokey Joe's, I played percussion on, so that was cool. And other records, I played on a bunch of records with this. I don't know if you've heard of this band. They were like, there's actually a little before my time, so you probably haven't. But there's this band called Renaissance. It was a prog rock band from the 70s.
Mm.
They had a couple of hits and a pretty great career. And the music is not easy. A lot of times signature changes, it's classically based. There's no blues anywhere near it, you know, which is kind of weird for me. But so that's why I can approach it more of like a classical thing, even though I'm sitting at the drum set. But there were a lot of parts and a lot of different sections, and you had, like, and there are no charts. So I'm transcribing 9-page charts. A lot of their tunes like 20 minutes long,
Mm.
I made a bunch of records with them and a lot of CDs with them that people could check out and actually see me doing some of it. Um, let me see what else. Just finished a record for a friend of mine, Robert Hill, who's a slide guitar player. It was a gospel blues record. We did it over the pandemic. I recorded everything here at my house, and it turned out really great. He got a lot of, was Grammy nominated and did really well. There's a band that I'm working with right now that I've done so many bands that are great and never did a gig. Like we record tunes, it ends up everyone gets busy. That's the wackiness of this business. We all get busy at different times. So I have this band that we're working on called The Well. We're working on it now, and it's basically a bunch of guys like me who have played with a bunch of different artists. So we take tunes from the artists we've worked with and we do them our way, completely different than the originals. So they're all songs that you've heard, and a lot of them are hit songs you would know, but they're arrangements in the way that we're doing. Hopefully that's being mixed now. So maybe soon I'll put something online about that.
What is that record to your left above your shoulder? The platinum record?
Oh, that's Springsteen's record. That's the greatest hits record.
Ah,
Yeah, that's his greatest hits record.
nice.
Yeah, and there was actually a something came out after that with a lot of the stuff on it called Tracks, big CD box set CD with a lot of the other stuff that I played on in those days.
Before
Sure.
we got on the call, we talked about musicians that were your contemporaries or came to New York before you.
Mhm.
And back in the late 70s, early 80s, they might have said, man, I don't know how musicians make it nowadays. So there was a lot of work back then. I know it's a lot different to come to New York now to try to be a successful musician.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to somebody that is coming to New York and wants to play on Broadway now?
Well, the stuff we talked about, no, be comfortable in a lot of different bags. Get yourself in any situation you can to play with different people. That's the first thing, because you have to have source material. You have to have somewhere, you know, you don't want to be the guy that can play the show but can't play music. You don't want to be that guy because now you're real.
What does that mean though? I mean, I know what you mean, but
Yeah.
in
Okay.
layman's
So
terms, what does it mean?
yeah, I got you. So you can learn a show by rote and be able to perform that show. But you get on a gig and someone calls tunes and you're not sure how to deal with that. You don't know how to do that because you didn't hear it before. Is that you're just working things out. Whereas if you've done a million gigs with a lot of different bands and a lot of people, you have that part of your playing already in the suitcase. You understand that, like when you started playing Broadway shows, you had played a bunch of gigs already. There are guys that can play a show, but God forbid you call them for something else. And they get on the gig, and then you're getting the phone calls. It's like, oh man, what'd you
Mm,
do? It's like, all right, you played the show, you sounded great. I don't know, you know. So, you know, it, the building blocks of music, there's no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts. You have to, and like you said, the only thing you can't practice is experience. Can't practice it, right? So what do? Get it any way you can get it. Go to, if people are doing jam sessions, go sit in, go, make yourself available, be somebody that people want to have around, you know, be, open-minded, likable, show up on time, do your homework, especially as drummers. If the rehearsal starts at 2 p.m., I'm there. I got to be there at 1:30. Not walking in at 2 o'clock. That's not gonna happen. I mean, and these are the things you gotta and the only way I know that is because I've been the guy that gets there at 2 o'clock and people have to wait for. You don't wanna be that guy, you know? Hard to get the
that's
next
true.
call. Hard to get the next call when you're that guy, you know?
Mm,
Um, uh, uh, yeah, if you're coming to New York and you wanna play Broadway, what I would say to you is be realistic. The door is not gonna just swing open and people are gonna roll out the red carpet. That didn't happen for anybody that I know. There's a pecking order, there's a way it works. Sometimes people say, "Well, I'm not getting called." Well, make yourself available. I mean, I remember saying to guys that I didn't know, cold call guys, that when I wanted to sell, "Listen, let me come in, I'll and check out your book. I know you don't need anyone. I understand you have your cats. I totally get it. I'm going to go out of my way for my own good to learn your book. And God forbid you're ever at a place where none of your guys can make this. I'm going to be ready. So you call me or you never call me. That's fine. I understand that. And I did that more than once, and a couple of times it happened and a couple of times it worked. You know, be willing to bend uh, and make friends with guys. Go hang out. Go to clubs where people are playing music. Anywhere people are playing music, wherever. Go to the bitter end. You know, anywhere you can where people are Red Lion. Go where people are playing music and hang with the cat and try. Buy somebody a drink, hang out, talk to them, make connections in any way you can, because that's the way we used to get gigs. It was like through, I mean, I met John Miller through Charles Tiscarfino. He told, when Miller would call for something, he'd say, check this guy, check that. And John would show up at my gigs. I saw John at the Bottom Line a bunch of times before he called me, and I was playing for whoever. So, I mean, that's the way we used to do it. I don't know if that exists anymore. I mean, I know there's still places to play music, and I know people are still playing music. So, get out, meet people, talk music to people, any opportunity to play. Even if you say, listen, pick a rehearsal joint and put your money together for an hour or two and play. You don't have to have a gig. Play and talk and play. And remember, it's supposed to be fun. It's the whole reason we do this is because it was fun.
Right.
So that would be my suggestion to guys coming in town and trying to, get these gigs. Because like you said, shows don't run as long. There's less and less of them. And 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 this is not some small town somewhere. It's New York City. And, in order to work in New York City, you gotta be good. You just do. You can't, I mean, but there's a certain professional level in New York City. And then above that, of course, every ceiling is there is no ceiling. You'll be as great as you has the energy and want to be. But there's a certain line of professionalism, and you got to be above that line. So,
I remember when I was playing the show Memphis the Musical back in 2009 to 2012.
uh
And then it was my first Broadway show. And I remember seeing the subs come in. There's Francesco Centeno playing
sure.
for George, and then Frank Canino comes in. And then there's all of these great guitar players that have played on records that I grew up listening to,
Yeah.
and bass players and keyboard players. That's how I met Dave Keys.
hmm
And all these people have done so much. I'm like, holy cow, I'm playing with the best of New York. And I felt myself, it's like, when basketball players would play on the court and then Jordan comes out, it's like, oh shit, I gotta step up my game.
That's
That's
it.
how I felt playing with all these people. And you're at the top level here. So you just don't come here and
Yeah.
expect to like skate, because
Right.
they're playing their ass off and you got
That's
to
right.
keep up. Even though the band that we had, you were at a high level, but these
Yeah.
other people, they're stepping in, they're like playing their ass. I'm like, Francisco, I'm like, he could fucking play. So what did he do? Who's this guy? Oh, Ashford and Simpson. He played on all those records.
Well,
Aretha Franklin. I mean, so many people. So another friend of mine told me during the pandemic when I was telling him about this podcast, he's like, look, I know there's 41 theaters and about half of them are musicals. That means there are about 20 drummers, and each drummer has 5 subs. So that's 100 people, and 15 may have percussion. So that's 35 people that play on Broadway at any one time, plus their subs. Maybe 200 people out of thousands. It's like being in the NBA. There's 352 players and there's 352 million Americans. You're one in a million.
yeah.
So think about the people that are coming on Broadway. It's
Yeah.
very small. And to try to say, I'm in New York now, I'm going to play on Broadway. Well, it's not very easy.
Not
When
easy.
you get a show like I had and it runs for a while or closes, then what do? You have to do what you just said. You have to go and play music, because you're going to have to go and play something in order to make a living.
That's right.
So you can't just go from show to show. Even the best players that go from show to show, like Clint or even, Sean McDaniel, there are times where he's not working.
Right.
He's working now, but we don't have, there are 5 of us that have long running gigs, maybe 6. So it's not easy. I'm sorry to kind of hijack the whole conversation.
No, you're absolutely right. It's not easy, man. That's the whole idea. I mean, coming to New York and expecting it's, I mean, I guess it's just like in LA, people go to LA to be movie stars and they're waiters. Well, you can't expect to just be a movie star the minute you get to LA. Well, here in New York, as a musician, Broadway is one of the last bastions of being able to make a good living and staying home. That's the thing,
Yes.
it's still coming back to your own bed. And it's one of the best ways. I don't know any other, I mean, there's Saturday Night Live. That's pretty great. But Sean, he's had that gig for a million years. And how many other gigs are there like that? Two, I mean,
Right. Yeah,
being,
You got Questlove and Shaw Pelton, and I don't even know who else is out there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Speaking of that, one last question. The banded together the boys from Glen Rock High. I can't remember. I know Jimmy Vino got the gig with Cohen. Were you part of his group, or like how he
No,
picked Max, right? Is that what happened?
Max got the gig.
Oh, really?
It was Max's gig. Max got the gig. And because
Oh,
he was
okay.
Bruce's drummer, and so he got the gig. He hired Jimmy and the rest of the cats. It was Max's gig to start. And, and also, since we're all professionals, our timings are never it's almost impossible to get us in one room. In fact, when they called for the documentary, I emailed the guy back. I said, "Yeah, sounds great." And the minute I sent that email, I said, "Oh, that's not gonna happen." I mean, to get our schedules, for some ridiculous reason, it worked. I don't know how it worked. I think I
Hmm.
actually had to turn down a gig at the paper mill for when we did that concert because I figured this is never going to happen again. I got to do it. I got to do it. Um, but you know, yeah. So that's how that happened. It was Jimmy told me that they said Max says he was on a street corner in Manhattan and he happened to see Conan and he said hello. And Jimmy said, "Yeah, what you don't know is Max was on that street corner for 2 weeks straight every night. He was on that street corner waiting for Conan to come out."
Wow.
I don't know if that's true or not. That's what Jimmy told me. He said, "Yeah." He goes, Max knew exactly when Conan was coming out of the building.
That's funny. Once again, get this documentary. It's really, really good. And it's just fun to watch. And just know that I want to go to Glen Rock just to see that big ass rock.
Get there. It'll wait for me. I guarantee. I can't guarantee much, but that I can guarantee.
Well, it was great to talk to you.
You can't go and thank you so much, man, for having me. It was a pleasure. It was fun.
Man, I love these kind of conversations. And
Yeah.
I wish you well.
You too.
And I'm sure we'll connect sometime in the future.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Take it easy
Talk
now.
to you. All right.
Yep.
Bye.